Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Into the GSMC Basketball Podcast right here at the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis. And once again, we're back again with more basketball news, updates, takes, and general things around the association and college, where you come here for all your basketball news and updates. So, obviously, today's show, we're going to get more into basically what's going on within the bubble. Also, some news has broken. The Knicks have a new head coach. A couple of players returned from the bubble since leaving the bubble for personal matters. And more news on that and more. Obviously, we're still going through the scrimmage stage right now with NBA right now. So, obviously, I got to give you updates on who is impressing during the scrimmages, which teams are looking good so far, who's looking more like what they were playing like before the season was postponed, and which teams look a little lackluster and need some more work, obviously, because remember, they only got 3 games before it happens. So everybody's about to play their 3rd game, I believe, after Monday, and then they will go ahead and continue to then get ready to play regular season game number 1, which opens up with Pelicans and Jazz on next Thursday. So obviously that'll be a very exciting time. And obviously when that comes around, I'll give you my preview predictions, my thoughts on the games when that happens. But, so, we're going to get right into it right here. And listen, the New York Knicks have gotten themselves a new head coach. And now they have a new leader of the Knicks, and that is Tom Thibodeau, a guy that has been mentioned as the front runner for the Knicks job for months. Finally lands it, gets a 5-year deal from the Knicks to be the new head coach. And to be honest with you, I've seen a lot of mixed reactions. I've seen a lot of just some people are happy with it, some people aren't. Some people feel like, with the Knicks' situation where they are right now, they feel like Tom Thibodeau isn't the best coach for where they are right now. Some people feel like they should have went with more of a Mark Jackson or a Kenny Atkinson. Because remember, Tom Thibodeau he's had bad teams, but he's never came into a situation where the team had no stars, because the Knicks currently have no stars. And then on top of that, is as, I guess, bad as the Knicks have been in the last few years. And I feel like the way he coaches, his coaching style, may not, it sounds good on paper because he's very on them. He's very hard on his players. He expects a lot of his players. Remember, with him, he plays his starters a lot. So, obviously, they say, some people feel like he goes hard in practice, and some players have said, it kind of can wear you out throughout the season. But you're going to be well coached, and all his teams usually play defense, because that's what he hangs his hat on. But a lot of people just feel like maybe he wasn't particularly the right person for the job. He wasn't particularly the right person to take over. I can see why. Personally, I personally would have maybe went with more of a Kenny Atkinson, a Mark Jackson, or even a new coach that maybe hasn't had as much opportunity, because I think the Knicks, what this move could indicate is that you try to bring in someone with name value to fix a situation, but the thing is that person with name value necessarily going to actually get them to where they need to go. Remember, the Knicks tried to do this before with Phil Jackson when they made him VP. Oh, we have this name who has had success in the league, and now we want him to be the VP, which means he'll get our roster better, which means we'll win games. And then it didn't happen. Yes, they did make it to the playoffs, and they did have a successful season with Carmelo and that gang, but realistically, some people look at that 10 years somewhat as a failure. And so some people are thinking, can Tom find success? I've always said with Tom Thibodeau, in my opinion, he inherited Derrick Rose, who became a star. Obviously, he got hurt, but then Jimmy Butler became a star. And he's always had a team that kind of fit what he wanted to do. They were always a defensive first team. They were kind of built like that Allen Iverson team that went to the finals in 2000, to me. You have a bunch of defensive players around you, then you have that one guy who could score offensively at will. That's kind of how they remind me of. And then he went to Minnesota. And Minnesota, it was more about, you have three young stars in Andrew Wiggins, Karl-Anthony Towns, and it just depends on what you think of Zach LaVine. At that time in Minnesota, Zach LaVine was looked at as more of a dunker and a highlight player than a actual real good NBA player. But he was always considered what some people may consider potentially could still be a star, which he's been showing now. But so with the Knicks, compared to that situation when he was with the Timberwolves, when he was at the Timberwolves, basically his job was to max out their potential because they thought, oh, he could get the best out of his players. He gets the most out of his players. And there was some question that he still wasn't able to get through to Wiggins, especially, or Karl-Anthony Towns. And remember, the successful season they had was when they traded for Jimmy Butler. That's the year they went to the playoffs. So, again, he technically had 3 stars that year. Got to the first round, AFC, eliminated, all that. So then, you go to the Knicks roster. And remember, they have Mitchell Robinson, young up-and-coming player. RJ Barrett looks good. Fonzo Tier looks fine. They have Julius Randle who's played well. They have guys who can play well. They have a lot of what you say pieces, but they don't have a piece. They don't know who's going to be their budding star yet. It still could be RJ Barrett. We have to see how he develops in his second year. Maybe Mitchell Robinson becomes a premier big man in this league. Like, the Knicks have guys that's like, okay, there's some potential here. But I'm not sure if Tom's necessarily going to get them where they want to go. From a roster perspective, a talent perspective, and maximizing that. And so I think that's big. So obviously there's tons of potential. There's tons of a chance for the Knicks to be good. But I just think that we won't know if they will be good till we see it all come together. We have to see what Tom's image of what he wants this team to be. And then we have to see how he builds this roster. And then we got to see, how he deals with a team that, like his Minnesota team, even though Minnesota had, he made moves where he brought in a lot of veterans. The Knicks are still relatively a very young team. And like I said, this is probably the least talented roster he's ever inherited in his coaching career. So, can he potentially work in a rebuilding, trying to raise, the team up, develop them a certain way, things like that? Can he put it all together? That's really the big thing. Can he put it all together so the Knicks can be successful? And listen, if James Dolan is smart, he's not putting any crazy expectations. If this is a rebuilding process that they're expecting him, because listening, you're giving him a 5-year deal. That's some pretty good security. So you're giving him a 5-year deal. You got to give him some time to rebuild his team and his image. Especially with COVID-19, you got to understand he may not be able to touch his guys till that minicamp. And then on top of that, you still got to do free agency, draft, all that. And so we don't know how the team's going to be formed by the time he gets there. So it's going to remain interesting with him to see how it all works out. Because, of course, there's potential in the Knicks, but they have to bring in more talent. They have to bring in players who know how to win. And Tom has to teach his young players how to win. He has to give them those habits that they need so they can win. Because listen, Knicks fans have been dying to start winning some ball games. To just be relevant. To say, you know what, we have something we can look forward to. You know what I'm saying? You could always say, well, the Knicks fans feel like, what do we have to look forward to? That's what they want Tom to bring them. Something they can look forward to. Something they can hang their hat on. Something they can say, you know what, I want to go to Madison Square Garden, one of the most historic arenas in all of basketball, to watch the Knicks play because I actually think there's something to watch. There's a reason to go watch. I think that's going to be the big thing moving forward. And it'll be interesting to see, how he coming in here, how that changes maybe the plan they have with the team. Could you see a LaMelo Ball, Tom Thibodeau pairing in New York potentially? That's going to be something that will be interesting to think. Tom Thibodeau is definitely a no-nonsense coach, so if LeVar tries to get involved, that will be an interesting clash. But also, Tom Thibodeau is also kind of one of those guys who doesn't like dealing with nonsense. Would that make him maybe be afraid to draft a LaMelo Ball? We don't know. I mean, obviously, it depends on what pick that the Knicks get, but it's just something that will be lingering and something that we'll be thinking about. So we'll have to see. But to get to our last story before we get out here for this first segment. So obviously, Lou Williams this past weekend has left the bubble for a personal family emergency. Personal matter. So what he did after that was, apparently while he was out, he went to a gentleman's club in Atlanta, according to the reports, to pick up some food. So obviously this gentleman's club is called AKA Magic City. So anybody in Georgia, Atlanta knows where that is, what kind of club that is. I heard the food was busting there. That's all I will say. And I could definitely understand why he would go pick up food there. But basically, he went there, and so obviously the NBA, depending on the personal matter, would determine how long they'd have to quarantine. And so the NBA has came to the conclusion, since he went to the gentleman's club, that he will have to quarantine for a whole 10 days, which means he will miss, I believe they said, the first 3 games of the restart, which obviously is not very ideal, because I'm sure Doc Rivers was hoping to have his whole team at least back or close to being fully back by the time the season started. Because remember, they're opening up against the Lakers Thursday. Lou Williams won't be there for that game. And we still have to see what happens with Patrick Beverley and Montrezl Harrell, but, and we don't, Zion's going to be back, but obviously that's kind of a big blow. Now, obviously, it's not going to affect the Clippers in terms of them making the playoffs. Could potentially affect seeding, depending on how they do. I mean, they're still a really good team without Lou, but it's just like Lou Williams is a pretty key piece of their bench. And if Montrezl Harrell doesn't make it back in time, their 2 biggest bench pieces aren't even going to play. So Reggie Jackson and Zubac have to step up. So it'll definitely be an interesting time to see how it all works, how it all comes together. And, listen, Lou did what he felt like he needed to do outside of the quarantine. At least he was honest about it and didn't lie about it. So, got to give him credit for that. But coming up next, Zion is back in Orlando. Also, the NBA non-bubble teams are likely, it seems like, to have their camp dates set in which month, you might ask? Stay tuned for that news.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed the Knicks hiring head coach Tom Thibodeau as their new head coach of the organization. Obviously this is a big move because the Knicks obviously have been looking for a head coach. And now that they found one, we'll see how it results and how it looks on the court. Obviously he has a rebuilding job ahead, trying to get the Knicks from being at the bottom of the NBA for the last 5-6 years to now becoming a competitive team and potentially a title contender, as the Knicks and the Knicks fan base has been missing good basketball, good, just excitement around the city of New York. Obviously, yes, Brooklyn, even though, right now they don't look the best. Next year they're coming back with KD, Kyrie healthy, and a new coach. So they're going to be expected to maybe be in the title picture. The Knicks at least want to be somewhat competitive and remind people who's the king of New York. But we have some news. Zion Williamson has returned to the NBA bubble and is ready to go. And based off, it seems like the quarantine days, he will be able to play opening night against the Utah Jazz on Thursday. So there you go right there. If you've been excited for Zion Williamson, if that's somebody you followed ever since he was at Duke, a guy that you have heard all the hype about and said, let me see what this man's all about. Well, there you go. He'll be back. But you know what's funny about Zion that I want to talk about? I was talking to my barber about it. I was getting my cut. And we were talking about who's all going to play in the restart and everything. So a couple weeks ago. And I told him that one of the main reasons that has been disputed why the Pelicans, or why they even had as many teams come back when it came to the restart, was because they want to give the Pelicans every chance possible to make the playoffs because Zion is a big draw. And my barber was like, I don't really care to see him. Because, remember, that's one reason, like apparently, based off ratings, Zion draws ratings. Ever since he was at Duke, he drew ratings. So it was interesting hearing that. Then obviously I've watched other podcasters. I've watched famous podcasters and radio hosts like Colin Cowherd and others talk about, I think Colin on this past week, the previous week, he discussed, is Zion the second biggest draw in the NBA behind LeBron, and different things like that. And I've watched other guys talk about, is Zion really worth, all the hype? Are people really watching Zion Williamson? And I want to get my 2 cents in there and say this. I believe that I do think the Zion effect is real. I think it's real because he did, literally to me, if you're able to get college basketball regular season ratings up, that means you must be a pretty important player to make people tune in to college basketball in the regular season. Because usually they don't turn until March Madness. So obviously you wouldn't think ratings would be that much higher for March Madness because it's March Madness in general. But when it comes to actually the NBA clearly views him as a draw. The other biggest draw they have is LeBron James. Even KD and Kawhi and guys like that aren't necessarily draws, so to say, where you'll notice an uptick in ratings at a significant rate. And so, is Zion really that big of a draw? I mean, first question you got to ask is, well, first, who exactly is trying to watch Zion Williamson play? That's the first question. Who do we think is this? What demographic is watching Zion? You would think probably the younger graphic, more than likely. Then you gotta think, what else could be helping him even draw the ratings or draw people in, as they say? And I think this is a big effect. It's the media effect. The fact that the NBA, ESPN, Fox, all of them have hyped up Zion Williamson as this next big thing, the guy who will take the torch from LeBron, the next big star, and then they consistently report on him like he is already that star, consistently talk about him, consistently tell you to tune in, consistently market him. They clearly have put all their eggs in his basket, thinking Zion is a draw. And so we need to market him like he is a draw. And that's interesting. Because if you think about it, that could be one of the reasons why people tune in like they think they do. Because obviously, you know, you keep hearing as a fan or as if you're a basketball player, watcher, or just a basketball lover, you keep hearing about this Zion guy. Zion. And so, you're like, okay, let me check this guy out. Let me see what all this hype is about. Because they keep talking about him like he is the next LeBron. And people need to not forget the hype that LeBron James got coming out of high school. Already being marketed as the chosen one. Which made everybody tune in when he hit the league. So with that being known and said, basically for the most part, it's clear to me that the NBA, they view Zion as that. And they're going to market him as that. And now people are curious because of all that marketing. And they're watching. And then Zion, listen, the thing about Zion is it's not like he's a bad player. Zion has shown in his short sample size, he can play. He has a type of game that's very exciting to watch, that can captivate you. So now you're looking at his on-court production, you're looking at his on-court acumen, and that could draw you in as a fan. So if that draws you in, now you're hitting the point where you think you have a guy who could be the next face of the league. Because the key to marketing is this. Okay, especially when you start something. You're going to get eyes at first. Of course, Zion's debut got eyes, especially because there was anticipation because he got hurt. The question after that is now the thing that you are marketing. What does he do when he's presented? Does he captivate fans and then all the people who flock to watch him now say, you know, that Zion guy, I want to keep seeing him play. I want to keep watching him play. Or do they say, he's all right. He's a good player, but not anything that I would go out of my way if it's not my favorite team to watch. Of course, I know him as a star, but outside of that, I'm not willing to go out of my way. Oh, Zion's on TV. Oh, let me change the channel. Because that's one thing LeBron did. Remember, LeBron's opening game, first game, was great. He came out putting on a show. And think about all those fans who flocked to watch that game because they want to see LeBron James. And then that captivating performance. And ever since that day, that's why he's always been a draw for the NBA and their biggest draw. And remember, Zion had a pretty great performance when he played. Is Zion a draw to me? I think Zion is a draw to me. I think he does get people excited to watch a basketball game, to see him play. But I think right now he still has to... The people who have watched basketball for a while, I think, are the ones who are wishy-washy on Zion. Because, you know, a lot of people have an opinion of today's game that's different from what the game used to be. And Zion is a part of that new game. So in terms of my demographic, we're going to love Zion. But the older demographic might be, I'm not sure if he's worth anything that all the other players in the league haven't been doing already. So obviously it'll be something that we'll have to stick around and see what happens and see how it goes when it's all said and done. Because it'll be very interesting to me moving forward, seeing how everything goes. So, you know, I think it's going to be interesting. I definitely believe it's going to be extremely interesting to see if Zion can keep that appeal that has attracted people to him in the media and in college and now in the pros. And then getting through the story before we get out of here for this segment. There's a report that the NBA non-bubble teams likely to have a mini camp in mid-August. And I quote, the NBA will likely hold mini camps in mid-August for the Elite 8, referring to the 8 teams that didn't earn an invite to the league's restart in the Orlando bubble, according to Mark Berman of the New York Post. Rick Bonnell of the Charlotte Observer previously reported the league will allow 8 teams to host a week of practice at their own facilities and then 2 weeks of group workouts. The Players Association is reportedly concerned about the health risks of the mini camp, but the voluntary camps could follow similar protocols to Orlando. The league was initially planning a second bubble in Chicago, but the location has not been finalized. Though not all players want to participate in an event with no postseason implications, it could help those teams who almost have to go a 9-month gap if there was no camp between competitive games. 2019-2020 season was obviously suspended due to COVID-19. Charlotte Hornets coach James Burrows says his team is at a competitive advantage for next year without the ability to practice. Also, Trae Young in a tweet basically was like, "Let me hoop." So basically, you could tell a lot of players and coaches are concerned about their players not being able to practice or play. So it sounds like to me that this mini camp that they're proposing and they're trying to set up is very much needed. Because you're seeing it as a lot of people really want this to kind of start. Everybody really wants this to go. And hopefully the NBA can go ahead, get it passed, and everything works out. So we have to see if it's televised, if they have any scrimmages like they do right now. But it'll be interesting to see moving forward how it all turns out. But coming up next, right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast, we're going to get into some more news and notes, more updates from the bubble, right here on the podcast and other basketball news.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed Zion Williamson being back in Orlando, and really it led into a whole conversation about, is Zion Williamson a draw? Is he truly a draw? What comes into being a draw? And why I basically said, at the end of it, I think Zion Williamson is really a draw. I really think. I think that's the reason why they put him in the first primetime game, in the first game back of this restart, because they truly believe people will tune in more because, oh, the return to basketball and Zion Williamson. So I had the big, discussion on that, and I also got into a quick story before we lay out a segment talking about the NBA non-bubble teams, the Elite Eight, they call them, having a small mini camp likely in August. So coming up around in the corner, they're gonna have a camp. They're trying to figure out what's the best way of executing this camp so they can get some basketball going. So it's not, like they haven't touched the actual competitive basketball experience for months. But now we're going to get to some, basically a review of the weekend. We're going to get in review for the rest of the show, the weekend that has passed, of scrimmage games that have happened. So, obviously, got to give my breakdown, my views. Obviously, like I said, we all love the fact that basketball has returned to us. Basketball has returned to the entire area of the United States, all over the world, all of it, because we all love basketball. But we're going to get to our Saturday games, and we're going to get to the first game. Lakers and Magic. Lakers won the game 119-112. Obviously, this game was another game for the Lakers to get themselves back on track, to play the way they know how to play the way they think they know how to play, and basically try to reach their potential. In this game, Anthony Davis had to leave, got a little banged up in the game, and he is probably not going to play in the next game, but they still were able to come out with a win. Kyle Kuzma had a great performance. LeBron had a great performance as well. Kuzma had 25 points, which was a game high for the Lakers. And they weren't more down than more than 1 point at any stage. So they pretty much, for the most part of the game, pretty much dominated Orlando throughout. Obviously, Orlando is a team that is not expected to do much. And obviously, listen, they put up a good fight against the Lakers in this game, but you could see the obvious difference in talent. You could see the difference in just skill and everything. And then obviously you have one of the best, if not the best player in the world, LeBron James, who had 20 points and 7 assists in 25 minutes. So, which has been pretty consistent for a lot of starters, around 20, 25 minutes, which is pretty good minutes, for, these scrimmages. It'll be interesting to me going into the last games how many minutes starters play, because that's the last game before now. Like, okay, now we have the serious games going on, which happened Thursday. So, obviously, that'll be a pretty big deal. Kuzma obviously had a big game. Kentavious Pope had a big game in this game, having 17 points, going 7 for 8 from the field. Also had 3 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 steals. Deion Waiters, we saw some Deion Waiters shaking and baking out there for 12 points. And then Dwight Howard and Clinton Cook both put up 9. Now, on the Magic side, DJ Augustine put up 21 points. Michael Carter-Williams came off the bench with 15. Aaron Gordon got 14, and Terrence Ross had 12. Obviously, the best player only had 10. Nikola Vucevic only had 10, 6, and 2, and 2. So, obviously, you think about the games the Lakers have played, they really haven't played any, I don't want to disrespect any team, but any great team, so to say, in their scrimmages. These are truly good games for them to really get themselves back going and being the Lakers team that's ready to try to go into Thursday's game against the Clippers and start the restart on a good spot. Next game, Bucks and Kings. Bucks won 131-123. Obviously a very high scoring game in this game. Not a lot of defense played. But obviously they got great offensive performances from Kyle Korver and Brook Lopez. Two guys that, hey, if they can play like this, you can see why the Bucks are going to be one of the hardest teams to beat all in the entire Eastern Conference. So obviously that will be a very interesting situation. And listen, in this game, the Bucks, for the most part, from what I saw, had points of where they dominate, and that's where I think where the Bucks sometimes is dangerous, because they have those moments where they can just dominate you as a team. They can dominate you. They can dominate your team. They can dominate, everything. And that's what makes them so dangerous, because they can do it from both offensively and defensively. They can get hot and go on a huge scoring run, or they can just shut you down. But continuing on, Kyle Korver had a big game, like I said, with 22 points. He had, Lopez had 21, 4 rebounds, and 5 blocks. And Giannis only had to give 15, 9, and 6. So, obviously, Giannis had still a very effective day. You could even say those are Draymond Green numbers, if you want. It still had a very effective day, even though, from a points perspective, was not a lot. Dante DiVincenzo had 13. Chris Middleton had 11. Obviously, Chris Middleton, you can tell through the games. You can tell he's a person who hasn't played basketball in months. You can tell he definitely kind of basically put the ball down, and now he's definitely trying to get himself back, which is going to be crucial for the Milwaukee Bucks if they want to even compete for a championship, that he gets back to his all-star ways and gets out of this rust that he's had and this out of shapeness. On the Kings side, Buddy Hield had 19 off the bench. Bazemore had 16 and 8. Bogdanovich had 13 and 3 assists. Corey Brewer had 12. Corey Joseph and Daquan Jeffries also had 10. So obviously, very even scoring from the Kings in this game. Shows you they can go a little deep with some guys that can give some quality minutes. But obviously, like I said, this was not much of a defensive game. It was just a very big offensive show. Jazz and Heat. Jazz won a close game, 101-99. The Utah Jazz, listen, so far so good from what we've seen with Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell trying to get themselves back into shape, trying to get themselves back going again. There were 8 ties, 16 lead changes. This felt like more of a true game, I think you would say, in an NBA perspective, because of the fact it was so back and forth. And Solomon Hill took the game-winning shot potentially to win it, but couldn't connect it. There were 10 lead changes in the fourth quarter. You could see this game was clearly just back and forth throughout it. Listen, Miami's biggest weakness was shown in this game is their long range. They shot 26% from long range. They are not going to usually beat teams off the 3-ball. They're going to beat the teams off making good decisions, getting to the free throw line, in the paint, scoring good defense. But Utah was able to shoot very well from the field. Gobert led the Jazz with 21 points and 8 rebounds. Mike Conley had 17 and 6, and Jordan Clarkson came off the bench with 17 as well. I think one thing that's going to be key for Utah is, can Mike Conley be what they signed him to be? Because so far it's been a disappointment. If he can give them these numbers on a daily basis with Donovan Mitchell, and then Jordan Clarkson can give them points coming off the bench, you could say they now have a pretty legit backcourt. Now you got 3 players who can come in there and score. Because before it was just the Donovan Mitchell show, and then whoever else could give him anything. If Mike Conley can be consistently about 16 to 20, Jordan Clarkson can give him at least 15 plus coming off the bench, Jazz will be in a much better position in terms of these games, because they're already one of the better defensive leagues in the league anyway. Kelly Olynyk was the leading scorer for the Miami Heat with 27. Tyler Hero had 20 in this game. 4 and 7 rebounds. Derrick Jones Jr. and Duncan Robinson had 10. So obviously, like I said, back and forth game, very competitive game. Two teams who are clearly trying to show that they can compete for a championship, even though they're not considered in that race. But that's why they're doing this, to prove that they can play and be at that level. Nets and Spurs, which this game might have came surprising. Because you would think, people wonder, would Brooklyn even win some type of a game, even scrimmages, with the fact that they don't have literally their top 6 players. But they were able to come out and beat the Spurs 124-119. It took 5 ties, 16 lead changes to determine a winner. Brooklyn had a 13-point lead, but basically, when they got that lead, they were able to keep it and not let San Antonio overcome it. The Nets honestly had actually one of the best defensive games. And that's one thing you could always say a coach will tell their teams if they're lacking offensive talent, especially. If we can play defense, we have a chance. And this game showed it. They had 14 steals in this game, Brooklyn had, and 11 turnovers, while the Spurs just had 4 steals and 24 turnovers. So you could see the Spurs were clearly the least efficient team, which is not typical of a Greg Popovich coach team. And they did not create turnovers, where the Nets created more turnovers than they turned the ball over. And that's always what you would want to be if you had a turnover differential, to be in the plus, not the minus. Derek White led the Spurs with 22 points in this game. Jokic Polov had 12. Brian Forbes had 15 off the bench. And Drew Eubanks also recorded a double-double off the bench with 12 points and 14 boards. On the other side, Chris LeVert had 27, 2 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 steals. Obviously, he's the best player they have. He's a young up-and-coming player, so definitely not surprising that he's playing at this level, because he's going to be the number 1 option now. Jared Allen had a double-double with 10 and 11, and Tyler Johnson came off the bench with 17. So, again, another competitive game, and it's just great to see, it happening the way it is. Clippers and Wizards, 105-100. The Clippers win. Obviously, it was a tighter contest than maybe what some people thought, but a good game nonetheless. Obviously, the Clippers were without Lou Williams. They were without Patrick Beverley. They were without Montrezl Harrell. Some wonder, will them not having their entire team this whole time, especially after this restart, hurt them? Because they still can't get that chemistry back, and then they're opening up against a team that's basically, outside of Avery Bradley, has been all together throughout it. We'll have to see. In this game, for the most part, the Clippers scored in double digits in this game. 7 of them did. But the leading scorer in this game was Patrick Patterson with 16. Paul George finished with 11. And Kawhi actually had a pretty bad night. 3 for 16 from the field and just got 6 points. Where the Wizards, Isaac Bonga had 15. The rookie Ryan Mashimura had 15. And Thomas Bryant and Jerome Robinson both had 13 points. And then, the last game of the Saturday recap, the Pelicans defeated the Nuggets 119-104. Good game. Pelicans were really in control since really the beginning of the game. And listen, it was a good game for the Pelicans. Obviously, they're opening up against Utah, a very quality team. And Zion should, as far as we know, be back for that game and be playing in the first game. Obviously, in this game, Alexander Walker had 21. Darius Thornwell had 12. Frank Jackson had 16. Jackson Hayes had 13. You know what I'm saying? Joker flirted with a triple-double with 11, 10, and 8. Miles Plumlee had 18 and 13. And Bobo had 15, even though he shot 6 from 19 from the field and 2 from 7 from three-point range. Listen, I done told y'all about Bobo. Bobo, listen, he is a kind of an X factor to me because he could do something different that a lot of big men can't do. He can stretch the floor, block shots, and do a lot of things. So that they have a very big lineup they could go to that might be able to cause a lot of teams problems if they go to it. But the Pelicans, like I said, had a very good showing in this game. They showed they have some depth. Again, it's funny. I always say it's weird for the rookies because you basically played almost a full season. If you didn't make the playoffs, you would have almost played a full season. And now you're coming back playing these games. You've had time to work on your game on top of that. And so it's just kind of like, okay, these, Jackson Hayes, really didn't get as many minutes at first, and now he's coming back playing pretty well. Will that result in him maybe getting a bigger role potentially within the offense? That's something that you have to look into and think about if you're the Pelicans. So, obviously, good win for the Pelicans here, who actually will end their scrimmages against the Milwaukee Bucks. So that'll be a very interesting game to see where they are. Obviously, without Zion still, but like I said, he'll be back for the first game of the season. So obviously, that's the game that they all care about at the end of the day. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we have the Knicks and the Nets. Both New York teams are looking into getting a star from the Chicago Bulls, Zach LaVine. And also, we're going to go over the Sunday games and what happened. All that right here and more on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we broke down all of the Saturday scrimmage games around the association. Obviously breaking them down one by one, giving you my thoughts on each game. Like I said, you are seeing teams round into form. You're seeing which teams need more work. You are seeing which teams probably won't be relevant. And honestly, it's just interesting because it feels like we're looking at new teams, to a certain extent. Like, think about the Portland Trailblazers. They're fully healthy now. It feels like we're looking at a different Portland team. The Pelicans, their roster, Zion's not even there. We haven't even seen Zion play in a game yet. We don't know how they look. This is just them without Zion. Lakers without Avery Bradley. We're seeing Dion Waiters and J.R. Smith. We didn't see them play with the Lakers before this. You know what I'm saying? We're seeing the Clippers 3 players down. Like we're not even seeing full teams. It's like we still haven't gotten the full experience, the full energy of the games and the teams and the players. Because it's scrimmages and it's like it really kind of makes you, like, wow, okay. And then, the games have been bad necessarily because it's just very refreshing to see basketball again. And then, we got the opening day games coming up Thursday, and it's an exciting time. It is an exciting time in the NBA right now to have these games. So, definitely look forward to seeing more of what happens. Definitely look forward to seeing more of what happens. But so, we're going to get into a quick story before we get to the Sunday review of games. And there is a report that the Knicks and the Nets have interest in acquiring all-star Zach LaVine from the Chicago Bulls. Obviously, in my opinion, this move would be interesting. Obviously, I think Brooklyn would do it to give them a legitimate third option. Because really, they have a guy. They have Spencer Dinwiddie. They have Chris LeVert. But I think Brooklyn feels like with the team they have, with KD coming back, they probably can give up one they could probably give up one of those players and upgrade. Like, they could, maybe a Chris LeVert for Zach LaVine, I would think people would look at that as an upgrade. And it's not even a slight on Zach LaVine. Because Zach LaVine is still a good player. It's not like Chicago would be getting back an old player. They're getting back a young player who has star potential in Chris LeVert. But Zach LaVine has already hit all-star potential. Though Zach LaVine would have to go back to being a third option. Because remember, he was a third option in Minnesota with Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns. Came to Chicago, became the first option, averaged 25. Now, some people may say, well, he's on a bad team, and etc. But now he goes to Brooklyn. Obviously, we got to see how he meshes with KD and Kyrie. Especially since they're both ball-dominant players. If he goes to the Knicks, he would probably be the star of the Knicks unless they bring someone else in. He would be the star of the Knicks. It honestly feels like he would be going to the same situation he's in Chicago right now. A lot of young talent, except just a different head coach in Tom Thibodeau. But he would be in the backcourt with R.J. Barrett, probably, Mitchell Robinson, and, you'd have to see how that all looked out. Obviously, I feel like a Zach LaVine trade to the Knicks wouldn't be ideal because I don't really feel like it changes what the Knicks would be. It's just a guy who just happens to play well. I feel like it would be more beneficial if he was traded to the Brooklyn Nets, in my opinion. So if the Brooklyn Nets are able to pick him up, I think that would be a pretty smart idea. But now we're going to get into the Sunday recap of games. And we're going to talk about all of them here, give my breakdown, my thoughts, all that good stuff. So, first game, Thunder and 76ers, 102-97 Thunder. The return of Andre Robinson. He returned during this quarantine, back from his injury, and he hit two 3-pointers in less than a minute to play to rally Oklahoma City to defeat the Philadelphia 76ers 102-97. The Thunder trailed as many as 24 in the third quarter, but came all the way back to tie the game at 92 with 3:20 remaining, and then took the lead, and then Robinson finished it off. Gilgeous-Alexander led the way for the Thunder with 16 points and 7 rebounds, 2 steals and 5 assists, while Steven Adams totaled 11 points and 9 rebounds. Luthez Dort chipped in with 13 as he actually got the start at shooting guard. And on the Sixers side, they were without Embiid, who had injured his right calf. Then, Ben Simmons flirted with the triple-double with 14, 11, and 9. Horford had 13, 9, and 3. And Richardson had 10, 4, and 3. Shake Milton also had 11, 4, and 2. So, again, another great game. I think the game went really well. I think a lot of good things happened in this game. Both teams, obviously, 76ers weren't at full strength. Oklahoma City's getting back into their rhythm. Again, it feels like we're not getting the full experience, the full potential of both teams, but we're getting closer to that point. The 76ers are, like I said, one of the most intriguing teams of this entire restart, in my opinion. If the B can stay healthy and they get back on track, it will be extremely interesting to see what happens with the 76ers team because they have that potential to be great. The next game, Celtics and Suns. Celtics won 117-103. Obviously, the Celtics were the dominant team in this game. They dominated the Suns from start to finish and played extremely well. Listen, Celtics are the popular dark horse pick for a championship. If they can get back to the way they played, if Jason Tatum can be the superstar we expect him to be, the Suns are just trying to somehow pull off a miracle to get into the ninth spot and be able to get into the playoffs. Devin Booker led the way this game with 17 points and 9 assists. Mikal Bridges had 16. Cameron Johnson had 13. Dio Saric had 12. DeAndre Ayton had 11. And Ricky Rubio made his scrimmage debut. It's total 6 points, 4 assists, and 2 rebounds in this particular game. Jaylen Brown on the Celtics side had 21 with a game high. Gordon Hayward had 17. Tatum had 16. Marcus Smart had 10. And Kemba Walker, who's still been battling that knee soreness, was able to get in 9 minutes and record 6 points. Obviously, we know with Boston, the key to their success, to me, isn't even on Jason Tatum anymore. It's Kemba Walker. If he cannot play, if he can't give you about maybe 30 minutes a game, maybe 25 to 30, I'll say that. Consistently, it's going to put a lot more pressure on Jaylen Brown. It's going to put a lot more pressure on Jason Tatum. Because Kemba can do just as well and score in the clutch just as well as anybody in this league. But if his knees continue to bother him, we don't know what that's going to mean long term for him. In our next game, Pacers and Mavs. Pacers win 118-111. Obviously, Pacers came out with a good start. After trailing 37-26 to Dallas, they responded with a 35-27 second quarter, followed up by a 31-22 third quarter. So obviously, the Pacers started off maybe a little bit slow, but they came back and reacted fast. And I think that, that clearly shows that, okay, they're playing pretty well. Indiana, listen. As always, with Indiana-type teams, I've always said they're very well coached. They're going to do everything they can right. They're going to play efficient because that's how they have to do to win. T.J. Warren led the team with 20 points. Michael Brogdon had 17. Miles Turner had 15. And Victor Oladipo finished with 16 points in this game. 7 rebounds. So, obviously, the top placer players all played well in this game, particularly. For Dallas, Luka Doncic fell shy of a triple-double, collecting 20, 11, and 9 in 24 minutes. Maxi Kleber had 18 and 6. Boban Marjanovic had 11, 6 off the bench, while J.J. Barea, it's funny, J.J. Barea been around for a minute, but he had 14 off the bench. And Kristaps Porzingis didn't play because he broke testing protocol on Saturday. So we'll see when he can actually get back into play. In our next game, we have Raptors and Trailblazers. Raptors won 110-104. There were 11 ties, 11 lead changes in the first 36 minutes. But after that, Toronto never trailed. The Raptors gave up a game-high 15-point lead. But, listen, Raptors showing that championship medal, that togetherness, that will, that strength, that power, able to come out with a strong victory against the Trailblazers. And Toronto showed why they've still been one of the best defensive teams in the NBA, holding Portland to just 39% shooting from the field. The Trailblazers were led by Juraj Nurkic, who tallied 17 points, 13 rebounds, and 5 assists, and 2 steals and 2 blocks. Carmelo Anthony totaled 14 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. CJ McCollum had 21. And Hassan Whiteside returned to action after having an Achilles, 6, 5, and 2 in 18 minutes. So obviously, from the Trailblazers side of things, things are picking up. Like I said, they're getting their rhythm back. I have always said, have the biggest curve because they have 2 new players that are key players to what they do. Now, finally back. Now they're having to merge with the new players they signed, like Hassan and Carmelo. And they're having to all bring it all together and see if they can make a run here, as they're currently in one of the better positions to still get a play-in game to make the playoffs in the Western Conference. On Toronto's side, Ibaka had 19 and 6. Siakam had 18. Lowry had 13. So you can tell, listen, they've always been a very evenly scoring team. Obviously, Siakam probably has to be the guy at the end of the day who leads them in scoring to really get them over the top. But for the most part, they're going to play even. They're going to play very efficient, smart basketball, and Nick Nurse is going to get the most out of these guys on a game-to-game basis, even within the bubble. In the last game we're going to get into, Rockets and Grizzlies. The Rockets win that game 119-104. The Houston Rockets, obviously, listen, Harden, Westbrook here, playing, balling, doing what they got to do. Playing well. And listen, the Grizzlies, back and forth game. They had a 8-point lead going into the fourth, but the Rockets basically just took over in the last quarter, showing the grit, showing their mental. Obviously, James Harden doing James Harden stuff, scored 31 on 7 of 15. So clearly this man was at the free throw line a lot. And he's totaled 36 minutes. That's a lot of minutes. Not a lot of players of his caliber have been playing those kind of minutes in the bubble so far in the scrimmages. But Russell Westbrook had about 8 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists, while shooting 3 of 14 from the field. Meanwhile, 7 players scored in double digits for the Grizzlies, including John Morant, who led the way with 17 points in 31 minutes. Brandon Clark had 16, Kyle Anderson had 15, and Jonas Valanciunas fell short of a double-double with 12 and 9. Obviously, the Rockets are looking good. Also, again, one of the most curious teams to watch during this restart because of the small ball. The small ball movement is very, very much in wave, in command. And a lot of people are excited to see how it all looks, especially now that, we can't use those excuses that Harden's not rested, tired. Everybody fresh. And Houston now can play the way they want to play with fresh legs. Gordon's back. Remember, Gordon was hurt a lot in and out of the lineup. They really have their top 5, PJ Tucker, Gordon, Russell, Harden, and Robert Covington, and we'll see how far that unit can take them in the playoffs. But that's all the time we have here for the GSMC Basketball Thoughtcast. Thank you for tuning in here, giving us another chance to be a part of your day, listening to us. We really, really definitely appreciate it. Also, don't forget to leave us a review or subscribe on any platform that you're listening to us on. We definitely appreciate it. Don't also forget to follow us on social media. And also don't forget to listen to our other amazing podcasts here at the GSMC Podcast Network. This is Brice from the GSMC Basketball Podcast signing out. Have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.